Let's talk about 9 bad video games that are actually way better than you remember. By the end of this video, my goal is to have highlighted 9 games that I feel like didn't necessarily get a fair shake at the time of their launch, and maybe help you find your next favorite surprise bad video game. Let's get started with number 9. No one really talked about this game, and that is Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. This is a Ubisoft open world style game. It's got that sort of Far Cry flavor, but I think that's a real disservice to what this game is. You're on Pandora from the Avatar movies, and you're playing as a Na'vi and trying to take out the RDA. Now, like I said, I think the biggest problem with this game was that no one really talked about it. There wasn't a lot of marketing. There was no buzz whatsoever, and I think people falsely misattributed this as just another Far Cry skin. A couple other things that people didn't like about this game: monetization. It is a single player game. There's a ton of stuff you can buy outside of the season pass, cosmetics and things like that, and it just feels kind of out of place, but it's also kind of typical for the Ubisoft model, so there's not really any surprises there. But if you don't like that Ubisoft monetization, nothing is better here, so just keep that in mind. Another sort of backhanded compliment to this game was that it's nothing more than a beautiful environment, and we'll get into that in a second about how great this open world is, but a lot of people just thought that was all style, no substance. So now let's talk about why this game actually is awesome, and I think critics and even users were maybe a little bit wrong about this one. Number 1. The world is stunning. I think the closest parallel to this game as far as how I felt playing it was kind of like playing Hogwarts Legacy. When you go through the castle in Hogwarts Legacy, it's just beautiful. And this Avatar world of Pandora is stunning. And there's all these different biomes, different plant life and animal life. You really feel like an explorer in this world. Now, an important thing about this too, and one of the reasons I think I've enjoyed my time with this game so much, is I turned off guided exploration, so that immediately filters out all of the kind of GPS simulator stuff that a lot of Ubisoft games tend to have. You actually have to talk to people and look around for your quest objectives, and that can get a little bit frustrating, I won't lie, but it really immerses you in this world in a way that a lot of other open worlds just don't. Man, we're only on number 10, and I could just keep talking about this game. I just think it's not a perfect game. It's not going to be a 10 out of 10 or anything like that, but for what it is just so excellent, and it really demands a reconsideration, I think, if you haven't tried it or haven't heard of it, and you're interested in trying something new. So this is also a game I've been recently playing quite a bit of, and I've been really enjoying it. I bought it right when it came out. There was a lot of hype behind the game. There was this idea that it was going to be this new open world formula that was really exciting, and it kind of fell flat. There were a few key things that I picked up that people really didn't like about this, especially at launch. Number 1, it felt sort of like a kiddie game. People were expecting something a little more deep and complex, but this is a pretty simple experience, and you definitely could play this with kids, and I think they would really enjoy it as well. Number 2, and I think this was a big one, especially at launch, was annoying narrations. So the way this is set up is there's a narrator in this game who talks a lot. There was also a stylistic decision to make it so that none of the creatures actually speak. They just make this like gobbledygook sound, and then the narrator translates and says, they say this, or he says, or she says this. And then finally, people just thought it was too safe and familiar versus other open world games, which yeah, I kind of get. There's a lot of different interesting systems in the game, like the factions and the light and dark. So basically you can choose whether to be a good guy or a bad guy by indulging in your light or dark feelings. It doesn't have a whole lot of impact on the game, and most of the systems in the game aren't super deep or complex. So again, simple, annoying narrator were kind of the big concerns with the game when it first launched. But as is the point of this video, there are a lot of things that make this game really great, especially on sale, especially if you manage your expectations. Number 1, it's a beautiful open world. The art style is awesome. I love all of the different creatures and a lot of the different combat animations and abilities you can unlock. There's absolutely something here that's like cute, cozy, and fun, but it is just not the most in-depth. It's not Elden Ring, I guess is what is important to say. Also, there is an excellent crafting system in this game. I've heard people call it convoluted, but to me, I think it's great. There's a real reason to loot the world and search different areas for new stuff. I haven't stumbled upon a ton of like secrets or anything like that in the world, but there is enough reason with this crafting system to actually search and discover. And really cool news too, if you hated the narrator when you first played and that was the reason you put it down, you can actually turn him off now in the settings. I believe you can turn him off almost completely, maybe not entirely, but for the most part, you can cut them out. Biomutant is a wonderful little surprise for me. I've really been enjoying playing it the last couple weeks over the holidays, and I really recommend it if you're looking for a simple, cozy open world game that is safe for kids and yeah, just kind of fun and cute. Coming in at number 7, we have Immortals of Avium, which is a big, bombastic, almost like Marvel Cinematic Universe style video game where you play as this guy with magic powers that end up feeling like finger guns. Pew pew. Some of the main concerns with this game when it first launched were some technical issues at launch. It was pretty buggy, didn't feel great to play at that point. Also, a boring and uninspired feel to it. It just felt like everything else. And in my opinion, sometimes that's not always a bad thing, but I can see if you're like looking for something to really shake things up and it doesn't, that is a disappointment. So I get it. And also then a poor story, so not something super exciting to get attached to or invested in. And I think with a game like this, if you don't click with the story, it becomes a little bit harder to like bother playing at all. But now let's talk about why it's actually awesome. So number one, I think the combat in this game is really cool. And while there is criticism that the gameplay feels kind of uninspired, I think this idea of having magic powers in place of guns is really neat. So you have all of these different spells that are associated with colors, and they all are just different kind of guns, basically. You have like a shotgun, machine gun, a grenade launcher, and then you have this really cool whip that you can like drag enemies in with. And my favorite thing in the game is grabbing an enemy with the whip, pulling out your red shotgun power, and just blasting them point blank in the face. It feels really good, crunchy, and satisfying. And I think that's worth the price of admission alone, just playing for the combat. I don't feel as strongly about this one as I do maybe like Avatar, but as like a weekend binge, I think it's a perfect game to pick up and just play through the weekend, feel like you've actually beaten something. And yeah, I think it's worth checking out for sure. Next up, we have Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the Mac Daddy of Ubisoft games. Ubi gonna Ubi. What? So if you don't know, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is one of the more recent entries in the Assassin's Creed series. It is part of what I would call a trilogy of Assassin's Creed Origin, Odyssey, and Valhalla. And what I mean by that is the gameplay in those games is quite a big departure from the previous games in the series. I think the main complaints about this game are probably not that surprising. It's a very bloated game. There's tons of stuff to do, which can be a really great thing if you're only buying one game in a year. This game will keep you busy. And then secondly, I kind of already alluded to this, but one of the criticisms of this game is that it's a big departure from the Assassin's Creed lore. There's not a whole lot of talk of Assassins and Templars and that main struggle and conflict that sort of birthed this franchise in the first place, so people were a little let down by that. But if you can get past some of those concerns, or any of the concerns you've heard about the game, there is something really special here, I think. I have over 120 hours across 2 playthroughs in this game, and I haven't even beaten it once, so just keep that in mind here. I have gotten so much enjoyment out of this game. The moment-to-moment gameplay is solid. It's a really smooth, polished experience. I will say the stealth, if you're going into this looking for a stealth game, that's the wrong type of gamer to come into this. It's not the best, like I said. It still feels good, like sneaking into different outposts and stuff like that. But every once in a while, it kind of goes on the fritz and someone sees you when they shouldn't. And that can be a little bit frustrating. But if you are interested in like Viking, Norse lore, this game is a great kind of history type game on that. Obviously, it's not completely historically accurate, but it's super fun to play through. And I think that's one of the things these last 3 Assassin's Creed games, at least I should be clear, Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla did very, very well, is just really living in those time periods or existing in those time periods. That feels awesome. And with this gargantuan amount of content comes this real cozy feeling in this game. You land in England in this game, that's sort of the setup, and you have this small community called Ravensthorpe. And as you play through the game, you start to upgrade Ravensthorpe, you level up your community, you can build new buildings. It's all very on the rails, but it still feels good. You have this home base to come back to, and everything you're doing is helping you build that up. But in general, it's not a very complicated game or difficult game, it's just very long. And so what's great is you can just settle into that and hop in, play a few quests. And I just think there's a really cool game here if you're in the mood for a cozy, uncomplicated, kind of on the rails open world game. So this is the first score that is below 6, so we're really coming into bad user score video games here, so strap in. So if you don't know about Outriders, it's like a Destiny 2, Diablo, Warframe type looter shooter where you're gathering a bunch of different gear, putting together builds, and pushing harder and harder content. It is not a live service game, though you do need to be online to play it, so it's kind of a weird one there. Some of the main concerns about the game were a cliche and cheesy story, so it's a very B-movie type action drama, I guess, if you want to call it that. Also, lack of meaningful endgame progression. So while there were difficulty tiers and the DLC did a lot to help that, there just wasn't enough content to sort of push yourself to do. Also, a really rocky launch, so there were a ton of issues, server issues, things like that when it first started, so anyone who was excited about it might have just been kind of stiff-armed out by that in the first place, so wasn't a great way to start the game. And finally, this is more like a thing that I think could be a critique about the game. I didn't necessarily see this online, but the early game of Outriders doesn't feel the same as the end game. Your builds don't feel as strong, weapons don't feel as cool. You really need to push through into that end game and start building a build for yourself to really feel how awesome this combat is. And that leads me to why I love Outriders and some things that I think are really awesome about this game. So number 1, gunplay. It is unreal. Top of class, So much fun moment to moment playing through any of the maps or missions that you can play through in this game. It just feels crunchy and satisfying, and bad guys blow up into like blood puddles, and it's just such a cool like Gears of War kind of feeling, I guess. Also, there are 4 classes in the game. They all feel distinctly different. They have really cool build options for all of them. It was fun pushing through content to see what those classes were capable of, and it all felt different, which was awesome. I also really love the loot chase in this game. I think the way that gear rolls with like mods and the way you can trade them out, the way you upgrade your weapons, the whole loop of going out, getting better gear, going back to your camp, and upgrading things with materials, and just that whole grind feels really, really good in this game. If you're in the mood for like a different looter shooter experience, you're burned out on Destiny, Warframe, Diablo, whatever, but you still want to grind and play a grindy game, I think Outriders deserves a consideration if that's what you're in the market for. Next up, we have State of Decay 2, which comes in at a 5.8 user score. And it is an open world zombie survival game where you actually can take control of all of these different people in the open world, bring them back to your camp, and basically build out a community for yourself and survive the apocalypse. So the main critiques about State of Decay 2 were its kind of janky feeling. I don't necessarily notice that, but it is something a lot of people talked about. It has this real AA feel to it, so that's not for everyone, right? It doesn't feel like a The Last of Us or God of War or I don't know. And probably the biggest critique I saw was it just felt like State of Decay 1, but just reskinned as State of Decay 2. There wasn't a whole lot of innovation in this game from its initial entry to the sequel. But if none of that bothers you, then I think there's a really cool game here. I've had a lot of fun playing through this. You basically, like I said, build a community. You can assign people to different roles. You can take people along with you on excursions out into the open world. So as an example, you might be at your community base and notice that you're running low on medicine. So you go out, you grab a car, you hop in it, you bring all the supplies you think you need, a gun, some healing yourself, maybe some tools for melee like a crowbar or a bat or something, and maybe you bring a survivor with you just so you have some backup. And then you drive out and you find a place on the map that is known to have the resource you're looking for. So you go on this little trip out there, you go to that place, you fight off some zombies, and you look for that thing, and then you find it, you bring it back to camp, and it just feels like this kind of emergent story, almost like you're playing through a zombie movie. It's also a really cool feeling going back to your base and looking at all the survivors you've put together and figure out kind of who should do what in your camp. Maybe someone has really good medical skills, or someone is a natural born leader or a really good soldier. You can use those to your advantage and kind of assign them corresponding to that. State of Decay 2 is definitely a AA experience, but it is a really special AA experience, I think. If you've wanted to imagine or play through a zombie apocalypse, I think it's definitely worth checking out. Coming up next is New World, or as it's now known, New World Eternum, which is an MMORPG. It just came out on consoles. That's part of the reason for the name change. I actually made a video about whether or not New World Eternum was worth coming back for. So if you want to check that out, it's at the top of the screen right now. I love New World. I will never stop saying that. It is not without its flaws though, so let's talk about those first. Number 1, there has been a very kind of dramatic, conflicted, tense relationship between the devs and the player base. There has been a lot of talk of roadmaps and roadmap content released for this game, and it seems like things get delayed a lot, or things don't ever end up happening, or they're still in the works right now and potentially coming out soon. And then kind of related to that, another concern people had was there wasn't a whole lot to do at endgame. There's a really great PvP scene in this game, but not a whole lot of content to actually do PvP on. There's only one main map for what's called Outpost Rush, which is a really popular PvP mode in this game. And then from a PvE perspective, there are a handful of dungeons. I think there's 12 to 14 or something. I've never actually counted all of them, but there are a few, and there's some variety there. But certainly once you get to the end game of an MMO, that isn't really enough content to keep things fresh. There weren't any raids when the game released. That has changed now. But yeah, there wasn't a ton of content at the time, and they're starting to fix that now, but it's still in its infancy. And then, again, related to what we've already been talking about, but the PvP scene, there is some really excellent PvP to be had in this game, but the PvP community, the general sentiment I see is they feel like they've been sort of ignored in this game, which is funny considering that this is a game that has such great combat and really lends itself well to a PvP game mode. So all that out of the way, I want to talk about the reasons why I think New World is awesome, why it might be still worth a consideration if you're looking for a console-friendly MMORPG. Number 1, there is no subscription in this game. You pay for the game, and that's it. You can buy a battle pass if you want. Obviously, there's seasons in the game, so you can do that, but you're under no obligation. That initial purchase price gets you everything you need to play the game. And once you get into the game, there are at least 100 to 150 hours of gameplay just to get to end game. And you could argue that's closer to 300. It just depends on the type of player you are. But across all the different aspects of this game, the main story quest, side quests, gathering, crafting, housing. There is enough stuff here to keep you busy for hundreds of hours before you even run into this content drought at endgame. And kind of on that note, gathering and crafting in this game, professions, life skills are just awesome. Like, it's my favorite implementation of crafting and like especially gathering in the open world, probably of any MMO that I've played at least. I really like WoW's professions, honestly. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know, but this just kicks the crap out of that. It is so fun just walking through the forest, knocking down trees, mining ore, finding different things to harvest. All of it just feels great. And the sound design is just amazing. It plays really great too. The combat is more engaging than a lot of other MMOs. And there's just so much to do that for a new player or someone who's never hit endgame and wants to come back and maybe start fresh, there's so much to keep you busy. You won't run into that endgame issue for a while. I think it's a great option for someone looking for a long-term game. Coming in at number 2 is Suicide Squad, and this is where we really drop into the terrible user scores. We are at a 3.4 with Suicide Squad on Metacritic. So comparing this to something like our first game we talked about, Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, there was a sickening amount of marketing for this game. It was everywhere, is my recollection, when it was first releasing. And it seemed like no one was really interested, which probably was like a warning sign to begin with. But if somehow you missed all of that marketing, Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League is from Rocksteady, who did the Arkham trilogy of Batman games, some of the greatest superhero games of all time. And Suicide Squad was their follow-up set in the same universe. And you play as 4 of the Suicide Squad members: Harley Quinn, Boomerang, Deadshot, and King Shark, and then they added more characters over time. And you play in this group of 4, and it's a looter shooter, basically. Where did Suicide Squad go wrong? Well, a lot of things. Number 1, Rocksteady, after this great kind of cinematic action experience with the Arkham trilogy, pivoted to looter shooter live service type content. It just didn't really make sense. And also with superheroes, it's kind of a weird fit for looter shooters. Marvel's Avengers is another great example of a superhero game that tried to go live service, and at least the implementation there with loot and stuff just didn't really work. Suicide Squad, I think, worked better than that, but no one was like hungry for this, so no one really cared, I think, was the big problem. Mission design in this game. So I have no excuses for this. Missions in this game are so repetitive. They have no real, especially in the campaign, like story narrative quality to them. You might have a cutscene or something like that, but for the most part, they feel like side quests in an MMO or something. They're very weird. And then there's probably a lot more things you could talk about with this game, but lack of endgame. So I really enjoyed my time with this game, but I can't argue with the fact that there was very little endgame to play, and a lot of people who got to the endgame just kind of burned out very quickly. But that's enough negativity. I want to talk about what I love about this game, and I know some people will think I'm crazy about this one, but hear me out. Number 1, moment-to-moment gameplay. I've talked about that in a few different games here. It feels so good. The mobility in this game and the different character kits, not from like a combat perspective, but from a traversal perspective, feel pretty distinct. It feels really good to just move around Metropolis as any of the characters and learning kind of the ins and outs of their mobility. It feels awesome. Also, while the endgame is not super built out by any means, one thing that I think this game does very well is create this sort of simple version of an MMO or looter shooter build crafting system. And what I mean by that is there aren't a lot of gear sets in this game, but there are some really cool ones to experiment with. I remember the one I played a lot, this was like pre-season 1 of the game, was a grenade build, and so I played as Harley Quinn, and my melee attack spawned a bunch of grenades, so I could just keep dropping these crazy grenades, and it was really fun. I don't really think this will be a game that will get you more than 50 to 100 hours of playtime, but if you are looking for something to just kind of pass some time and grind and maybe listen to something while you're playing, I think it's really, really fun. Now, having said that, they have released quite a few different seasons of the game. They have released an offline mode now, so you don't have to be online for this game anymore, and there's new characters to play with as well. So maybe you're talking another 25, 50 hours, but I honestly don't know. But at the end of the day, if this clicks for you, I think you've got a decent amount of time to grind in this game. And I recently picked up the game on Xbox. I had been playing it on PS5, but I picked it up on Xbox as well for $5. The deluxe edition was $5. I don't know if that sale's still going on, but this game is a no-brainer at $5. You will easily get 20 to 50 hours out of this that I think are really fun if it clicks for you. Coming in at number 1 is Diablo 4 with a 2.5 user score review. What? So, if you don't know Diablo 4 or Diablo as a franchise, it is a top-down ARPG that is very, very loot and build focused. There are some really fun combos in this game and ways to build your character that feel really great, but Diablo 4 was met with a lot of criticism basically all the way through its life cycle, even up until now. So when Diablo 4 first launched, to be fair, people loved the campaign. People were very impressed by it. I think it's a great campaign too. The challenge was a game like Diablo is all about endgame. It's all about grinding, getting stronger, taking on harder and harder content, and having like kind of a carrot on a stick to keep chasing throughout, to keep grinding, something to entice you to keep going. Diablo 4 really lacked that endgame content, and people really felt that. It was also a ridiculous grind to get to level 100. People definitely did it, but it was super grindy, and there just wasn't a whole lot of reason to get there. Also, what is now an infamous balance patch, the devs really misread the room when the game first launched, and the first big patch was just a huge nerf to some of the best classes and builds in the game. The community really didn't appreciate that. It felt like they were getting nerfed and just taking the fun out of the game. And so I think, to their credit, the Diablo devs seem to have responded pretty well to that, at least. Like, they've learned their lesson with that, I think. But that definitely left a bad taste in people's mouth. And then, kind of switching gears here, but I think it's important, especially as I talk about what I love about the game now. At the start of Diablo 4, gearing was so complex. Nothing was intuitive. It was just all these weird modifiers that didn't necessarily make sense, and that was confusing and frustrating for a lot of gamers. But we are now into, I guess, year 2 of Diablo 4. The expansion dropped this year called Vessel of Hatred, and there have been a ton of changes to the game since it started. Number one, we already talked about this. If you're just looking for a story to play through, the Diablo 4 campaign is actually really good, at least by Diablo standards. Number two, this was true from the very beginning of the game. This is excellent combat. Sound design is great. It just feels good to play, and you feel like you get stronger and stronger, and you hit really, really hard, take out waves and screens of monsters. It's just a really fun, mindless good time. Also, when we look at where Diablo 4 is today versus where it started, the build crafting and gearing has just been massively overhauled and feels so much better. It's so much simpler. Everything that you roll on your gear now actually makes sense. And that's like my favorite thing about Diablo 4 is how casual it is. And that tends to be one of the things that a lot of people don't like about it. I love that I can drop into Diablo for maybe a week or two and just grind through all the content and feel like I've actually completed that experience. And then I can move on to other stuff, and in another 3 months, I can come back for a week or two. That loop feels really good for a gamer like me who wants to play a bunch of different stuff. Now, I know that a lot of people still say it's kind of rough as far as content at endgame, but I think there's plenty to do now. There's bosses, there is the pit, there are nightmare dungeons, there is the Undercity, and there's also the raid, which is like a really cool experience. I played that with a friend and I had a blast. So yeah, Diablo 4, much better than it was when it started. If you have been playing Path of Exile 2 recently, are either kind of done with that or feeling like it's too complicated or you don't like the difficulty of it, Diablo 4 is this like kind of massive shift into like the casual version of that Path of Exile experience. People are going to hate it because of that, but I think a lot of people are going to love it because of that too. And hey, if that's not enough good, bad video games for you, check out this video right here where I talk about why I love Starfield, even with all of the criticism leveled against it. I'll see you there in just a second. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Dylan. This is Beep Boop Loot. We'll see you in the next one.